welcome back to Combat Mission Cold War. We're a little off schedule this week, but I haven't actually put up the usual kind of edited AAR for a while, and it's been even longer since I brought some armour out to play, so the war room's getting shunted back to next week. Instead, we're going to tackle one of the tank training scenarios from Combat Mission Cold War, specifically the 1982 version, which pits American Abrams and M60A3s against Soviet T-80s. The scenario itself is dead simple. I'm in command of a US tank company, that's 2 platoons of M60A3 TTSs and 1 platoon of M1 Abrams with 5 tanks per platoon, and we're launching a spoiling attack. There's a degraded Soviet tank battalion coming our way with 6 platoons of T-80s. They're going to get more points the further up the map they get. We're going to get points for taking them out, with bonuses for hitting the HQ tanks. There are also 10 touch objectives scattered across the map, Alpha to India, but they're only worth 50 points each, while there are 3,500 points on the table for enforced participation in the Turret Toss Olympics. So the ground objectives are nice, but this is really about breaking things. I think my main difficulty is going to be adapting down to the original M1 Abrams from the more advanced models found in Shock Force and Black Sea. Don't get me wrong, the M1 is a huge step forward, but compared to modern variants it has a smaller gun, 105mm compared to 120, and a sensor package from the 1980s. The main advantage it has here over the M60A3s is the armour, and getting to test the armour out means that you're a long way inside the survivability onion. I also don't have that much experience going up against the T-80. Right now I'm very conscious that my mental model is based primarily off of Combat Mission Shock Force, which is to say that I expect Soviet-era tanks to detonate the instant they get hit by something. In the context of 1982 though, the T-80 is a tough piece of kit, at least in the frontal arc. To paraphrase the briefing, I need to avoid long-range head-to-head duels and hit them in the flanks. Of course, that's solid advice for any tank fight. The tricky part here is going to be setting the stage for those kinds of engagements. The map is basically an unevenly corrugated desert corridor, 2 kilometers wide and 3.5 kilometers deep. We have a series of incomplete complex ridgelines interspersed by wide, shallow valleys. This basically gives us 2 places to fight, on the ridges or in the valleys. Being up on the ridges will give me the longest sight lines and fields of fire, as well as potentially giving me the opportunity to engage from hull down, at the cost of being much more visible and attracting less decisive longer range engagement. Being down in the valleys will shorten all those sight lines, making both sides simultaneously harder to spot and vulnerable to surprise at closer ranges. Those kinds of engagements might prove advantageous to the Americans with their superior spotting ability, but there's still a lot of risk involved. Clearly the answer is to use both as necessary. Whatever I do, I need to move forwards. I need to put some fingers out to find the enemy before he finds me. Ideally, I want to work out his direction of travel and then hit him on my terms with hasty ambushes. That means some poor unfortunates get to be my recce screen, and I think I'm going to go with the Abrams. They're my most survivable assets. If they're lucky, they might be able to tank a few hits, unlike the M60s, which will just explode. So the broad plan is to push forward with 1 platoon up and 2 back, the Abrams scouting and the M60s ready to capitalise on any opportunities that present themselves. I've started off with all 3 platoons behind the India Ridge. Despite having the entire western map edge to deploy down, this is the only place where I won't be starting in potential sight of the enemy. This means that the India Ridge is to my front, and that immediately brings up a tactical decision. There are 2 basic ways to deal with hills, whether you're trying to see or move past them. You can go over, or you can go around. Over gives you a better view, allows you to peek or fight hull down if you're lucky, and is generally faster. But going around means you're harder to spot, and you don't expose your underbelly as you crest, or your top armour as you go down the far side. At the beginning of the battle, I'm happy looking over the crest with 1 platoon. They've got the Abrams with their composite cheek armour. Assuming the enemy is at long range, they should be pretty safe while presenting a tiny hull-down target. Leapfrogging the next platoon forward under cover of the Abrams is again an exercise in going over. Going round means heading out into the open ground on the left or right, where there are some long sight lines that the enemy may be able to cover. Popping over the crest of the India Ridge and back down into the dead ground on the other side seems much safer. 3rd Platoon makes the move at speed, minimising exposure for both the individual tanks crossing the danger area of the crest and the platoon as a whole as they all go together. They are exposed, but they're only exposed for a little while at long range, and will hopefully be back into cover before the enemy can get a shot off. As they go, we get our first contact. 1-2, or 2nd Tank 1st Platoon, on the right edge of 3rd Platoon's transit, spots a T-80 all the way across the map, cresting the ridge in front of Objective Delta. It's about 2,600 metres away, but that doesn't stop 1-2 from scoring a first round hit. The AP FSDS round just pancakes on the side of the turret though. At that range, against the T-80's armour, it just doesn't have the momentum to penetrate. But we've got our first indication of enemy activity. This is the Soviets, where there's one, there's more. Looks like there's at least a platoon advancing on my left. So my immediate reaction is to start thinking about finding positions where I can get flanking defilade shots into anything pushing the left. 3rd Platoon moves forward in the dead ground to touch Objective India and prepare to occupy the hotel ridge, while 2nd Platoon stacks up behind the India Ridge in preparation to follow. 1st Platoon is still on overwatch, and they soon spot more enemy contacts cresting a hill near Objective Charlie. Given the timing and the position, this is probably the same unit we engaged a minute earlier. There's obviously more than a single T-80 now though. We're only 5 minutes in at this stage. 2nd Platoon is transiting the hotel crest, and I'm just shuffling 1st Platoon HQ to back up 1-2's coverage of the Charlie Hill when the spots start to resolve. 1-2 opens fire on the lead T-80, joined a few seconds later by 1-1 on the left edge of the ridge. They quickly get the range, but the T-80 shrugs off 2 hits on its frontal armour before 1-1 finds the lower front plate and brews it up. By then, there are more T-80s coming online. One of them gets a shot off at 1 HQ that falls short, leading to the platoon HQ tank joining in, and the engagement rapidly turns into a slugging match. The Abrams have all the advantages here. They're hull down and waiting while the T-80s rolled onto the hilltop in full view, but at this range all the Abrams can do is hammer on the Soviet stick armour and hope to get lucky. They managed to wipe out an opened up tank commander, a serious loss for Soviet tanks with only 3 crewmen, and punch a hole in another T-80's lower front plate, but that one just comes back for more. This is obviously an indecisive engagement. I'm getting hit, but not killed, and I'm feeling shockingly lucky that the Soviets are doing a terrible job of fighting back. I can't count on that lasting though, so I make the call to disengage. 1-1 pulls back out of sight, as do 1 HQ and 1-2 after popping smoke. Both my M60 platoons are over the India Ridge now. They don't need any overwatch, and there's no sense hanging around giving the enemy a chance to get their own hits in. I do need to get the Abrams forwards as well though. Clearly they're not going to be much use back here trading shots at long range, so they go over as well, rushing over the India Ridge while the smoke is still up. Of course, neither smoke nor movement are real impediments to Abrams gunnery, and they manage to spot and engage the T-80s on Charlie Hill again as they go, taking out one presenting a little bit too much side. At the same time, 1-4 on the far right spots a couple more T-80s cresting the much closer ridge near the Gulf objective. That gives us another piece of the puzzle. The briefing mentioned the enemy was coming on with a degraded battalion with only 2 platoons per company. So far I've spotted 6 T-80s on the left. We can round that up to 7 to get 2 3-tank platoons and a HQ tank, which would make up one of the advertised companies. It's a reasonable assumption that the Gulf contact is another company coming up the centre. That leaves the last one out there somewhere. I'd guess out on the far right if the Soviets are advancing online, or behind either of the other 2 companies if they're playing 2 up 1 back. Either way, the Gulf contact is literally on the next terrain feature over from the hotel ridge, so I need to go firm and work out how I'm going to deal with them. The hotel ridge itself is basically a deformed horseshoe, with the open end facing off to the right. 3rd Platoon's M60s are already taking up positions at the far side. I'm trying to slot them into defilade covering either left or right. There's no sense facing directly at the enemy. I need them to have cover between them and the Soviets, with the tanks looking out to the side into their target's projected direction of advance, where they can hit them in the flank. There aren't that many opportunities, though I'm able to slot a couple in either end. 3-2 creeps a little bit too far forward on the left to try and keyhole, and they spot the T-80s still hanging around on Charlie Hill. I pull them back pretty quick, but 3-2 manages to nail one through the lower front plate before it dips back into cover. That was definitely a lucky shot though. I don't think 3rd Platoon has enough firepower to hold off 7 T-80s punching the centre from Gulf, so 2nd Platoon is hulled down behind them on the closer side of the horseshoe, ready to engage at short range if the enemy makes a move. That gives me a base with some depth and good cover to work from, while leaving 1st Platoon's Abrams free to manoeuvre. The question is what to do with them. Obviously I want to use them to destroy the enemy. Stacking them up with 3rd Platoon for a frontal engagement is probably not the smart choice here. The left is worryingly open and exposed to both the enemy on Gulf Ridge and potentially an advance by the enemy from Charlie Hill, which leaves the right. That's also concerningly open, and there is that 3rd Soviet company out there somewhere, but I've been eyeballing that flank since the start of the battle and seen nothing. That doesn't mean there's nothing there, but the whole map slopes down from left to right, and the mouth of the valley between Hotel and Gulf is low enough to provide some degree of cover. I'm starting to think that if I can get a couple of tanks down there, where they can get eyes up the valley, they'll be in a prime position to catch any T-80s pushing out of Gulf in their vulnerable flanks. It's a big leap though. There's about 500 metres of open ground between Hotel and prime flanking positions on the far side of the valley, over a route that the enemy on Gulf might be able to see, and that any enemy in depth on the far right can almost certainly see. This would be a bad time to rush. But I can break that flanking move into 2 sections. The depression in the centre of the Hotel horseshoe runs down and to the right, giving me an extension that goes part of the way and opens up some sightlines of the Gulf. That'll make a solid short flank I can occupy to set the stage for going all the way with a long flank. In the meantime, I'm getting a little bit cagey about where the enemy actually is. The tanks I have in position around Hotel are all hulled down with narrow fields of fire. That's really important for minimising exposure of the vulnerable M60s, but it also severely restricts my situational awareness. I don't want to get surprised by the enemy appearing over the far Hotel crest at point blank range while I'm messing around trying to be clever out on the flank. So I decide to play pop-up with 3-1 in the centre of the ridge. The plan is to roll up to get a better view across a Gulf, then reverse like hell back into cover. 3-1 peaks the ridge and spots the T-80s on Charlie Hill starting to advance again. I gave 3-1 a 15-second pause to give it time to spot. That's enough time for the T-80s to engage. Their first shot goes high, as does 3-1's return fire. Then with 5 seconds of pause still to go, one of the T-80s fires a barrel-launched ATGM and nails 3-1 in the turret. The tank is a write-off, only the driver manages to get out. That one was on me. If 3-1 hadn't paused for as long, or if I had been less impatient to relocate the enemy, I probably would have gotten away with it. So ironically, the loss of tank 3-1 makes the score 3-1, but at least I've gotten some idea of what the enemy is up to. With the far right still apparently empty, I've been able to bring 1HQ and 1-2 round to the short flank. That's revealed that the enemy have left their previous position up on the Gulf Ridge, edging the Abrams further forwards and accepting the risk of flanking shots from the right, reveals the central T-80s have descended the slope and paused in a shallow valley just right of the Gulf objective. We're going to call that the Gulf Gully. It's good news. By coming off the high ground, the enemy have removed themselves as a potential threat to the long flank. They're also somewhat exposed to the 2 Abrams, who start to engage as 1-3 leapfrogs them in the dead ground and rushes forward to exploit. 1HQ and 1-2 aren't that successful. The short flank just isn't at a wide enough angle to let them get at the T-80's side armour. They get their hits in, but only manage to score a single partial penetration. 1-3 meanwhile cruises round and approaches a hull-down position at right angles to the Gulf Gully. Just as it's rolling into position to prepare to pop up and engage the central T-80s, it spots another tank just coming to a stop on the high ground beyond. 1-3 immediately nails it in the side and knocks it out. As a guess, that was probably one of the T-80s from the Charlie Hill moving up. 1-3 is in about as perfect a hull-down flanking position as I could want. Another T-80 appears next turn and gets the same treatment, while the crew of the tank that got partially penned down in Gulf Gully bail out before 1HQ detonates their vehicle. Right now, I can taste the blood in the water, and I'm rushing 1-2 up from the short flank to join 1-3 and get more guns into that position. As it's making the trip, 2 more T-80s roll over the crest of the Alpha Hill. Up there, they're high enough for several of the T-80s back on the Hotel Horseshoe to engage, and they do, pounding the first one in the face with 105mm shells until it starts to reverse. 1-3 gets a shot away, but the T-80 has swung its turret round and tanks it on the turret front just before 1-1, covering the centre from the right edge of the Horseshoe, hits it in the side and takes it out. The second T-80 sends a shot back in return and only just misses high before 3-3, one of the M60s right next to 1-1, puts a hole in it. That's another 2 T-80s for the scoreboard, 8-1 to me for now. I don't know how many enemy tanks there are left in the Gulf Gully. There's 1 down, but another 5 contact icons still there. On the left, split between Charlie Hill and Alpha Hill, there are 7 burning T-80s, so that flank is probably dealt with, assuming I'm up against triangular Soviet tank platoons and not square ones. So I'm in a really strong position now. The only confirmed enemy I have is trapped in a position that I reckon I have a good chance of being able to muscle in on from the right, and if he tries to pull back or push on, he'll come out of that dead ground and be exposed to decisive flanking fire. My worry is that missing 3rd Company descending on me, but the far right still looks entirely innocent. Whatever's going on, I need to bring more tanks up to the long flank to capitalise and bring them round onto the close side of the Foxtrot Ridge, where they'll be in defilade to anything on the right and able to look down into the Gulf Gully and get a good view of the enemy trapped there. But the T-80s make a break for it before I'm all set up. 1-2 is in the long flank position, 1HQ is just rolling up to join it, 1-3 is reversing out of there to go round and join 1-1, which is already up on Foxtrot, supported by the Company XO's M60. The 6 remaining T-80s in the Gulf Gully advance out into the open. They're all caught in the kill zone and destroyed. There's nothing fancy or remotely fair about this. I have it written down in my notes as the Gulf Gully massacre. It makes the overall score a very one-sided 14-1, which would account for 2 of the enemy's 7 tank understrength companies. Now all I have to do is find the last one. This proves to be a lot more long-winded than I would like. First, I need to consolidate onto the Alpha Gulf line, bringing up the M60s of 2nd and 3rd platoons to stack the next set of defilade positions and mop up bailed out Soviet tankers in the Gulf Gully. 1st platoon's Abrams move across the Foxtrot, touching the objective there and getting eyes on the next valley. There's still no sign of the final T-80 company. After about 20 minutes, I punch 1st platoon across the valley floor in the general direction of Objective Echo, with a Mine 2 swinging round and rolling up the enemy from the ridges on the right flank. The 1st platoon does spot a T-80, but it's all the way over on the left at the base of the Alpha Hill, behind the wreckage of the left-hand company. I've got M60s up there, but the Soviet tank is in defilade to them on the other side. So I get a brown pants moment, as my entire Abrams platoon spends a turn flank on to a T-80, but the enemy is luckily facing the wrong way and ultimately slower to react than 1st platoon. 1HQ and 1-1 are already taking aim at the end of the turn, and they both put sabot rounds into the side of the T-80 even as they pop smoke. That's the only enemy tank though, it looks like there was just the one. With that immediate worry out of the way and 1st platoon's position seemingly safe, I take the opportunity to roll some M60s forward to double check the base of the hill. They don't find any more tanks, but they do find some die-hard enemy tank crews who manage to dome a couple of tank commanders before I can put them down. Extending 1st platoon towards Echo to get the old L-shaped kill box going in coordination with 2nd and 3rd platoon's overwatch from the Alpha Golf Foxtrot line, there's still no sign of the enemy. It's not until turn 53, with 7 minutes left, that 1-2 stumbles onto them on the map edge. The whole company is just sitting there in what I assume is its deployment zone. I don't know if they're supposed to be there, if the AI plan misfired, or if I failed to hit a trigger or something. Either way, I've finally found them. 1-2 immediately gets stuck in, taking a couple out in quick succession, but I had ordered one forward to advance at the same time, and it finds itself exposing its flank. One of the T-80s scores a hit and knocks it out, but overall it's too much for the AI and it throws in the towel. That makes it a total victory by default, but seeing as though I'm at the enemy side of the map rather than vice versa, and there are 17 burning T-80s on the field compared to one M60A3 TTS and one M1 Abrams, I don't think there's going to be much doubt for this one. Those two losses are notably both instances where I was looking for the enemy. The M60 loss was due to me pausing for a few seconds too long during a peak to re-establish contact. The Abrams loss was the result of me rushing to find the enemy as the timer ran out. I wouldn't necessarily categorise either as mistakes. Both times the intent was solid, the execution could maybe have been a little better. But they were consequences of having to do my own reconnaissance. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. Every asset is a recce asset, but as always, some degree of combined arms would have been really helpful. A dismounted scout team cresting one of those slopes and setting up an OP obviously has a much lower profile than something like an M60. As for the actual combat, as the briefing indicated, long-range dueling was a lot less effective than closing the range and engaging from the flank. That's not rocket science, but jumping from concept to practice can be tricky. I was probably very lucky that I never got any contact on my right and I could extend one platoon down that flank to orchestrate the Gully massacre. Speaking of, it's always interesting to see where the kills actually stack up. Time after time in combat mission, it seems to be the right unit in the right place at the right time that does the damage, and here it was no different. Of the 17 T-80 kills, 1 HQ, 3-2 and 3-3 got 1 each. 1-3 got 2, and 1-1 and 1-2 racked up 6 apiece. So despite having 17 of my own tanks, to some extent 15 of them were creating the conditions for 2 of them to make the decisive impact. And while they were both Abrams, that's purely because I was using my Abrams platoon more actively than the others. Neither 1-1 nor 1-2 tanked any hits while they were getting the job done, so the armour difference just isn't that relevant. The M60A3 TTS and M1 Abrams have pretty much the same firepower, both have the same gun, they both have thermal imagers and good fire control systems. The Abrams are a little bit faster when they go all out, but I'm not sure that would have made much difference. In other words, I could have done the same thing with just M60s. The key element was engaging the enemy on my terms, getting away from a frontal slugging match and exploiting the terrain to get onto the flank of those T-80s. There's nothing in that is inherent to any specific kind of tank design. So that's a quick tank battle in Combat Mission Cold War. Bit of a taster before we get on to testing out some units for the company challenge. Hope you all enjoyed this one and found it interesting. If you'd like to watch these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.